Hi there, I'm John Moore, and I am a shamanic teacher and practitioner from the great state of Maine in the United States. And I'm going to talk to you about shamanism in America. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about indigenous shamanic culture. I'm going to talk to you about shamanism as it is today. What do I even mean when I say America? Um, so those are those are a few topics, but it's important sort of background information to understand what's going on, what's available, all of those kinds of things. And so there's a little bit of history and there's a little bit of prehistory. And obviously, prehistory is a little bit difficult to talk about because we have to go from um, spoken word and we have to go from archaeological evidence, and it's not the same as sort of like you know, eyewitnesses writing things down or that sort of thing. So let's talk about indigenous culture in America. Or first, I'll talk about what I mean when I talk about America. So I'm from the United States of America, and here, most people, when they say America, mean the United States. But that being said, there are two continents that are the Americas: North America and South America. And, well, actually three if you count Central America. So North, Central, South America, three Americas. And, I don't know if you consider all of those people Americans. It would depend on who you ask. But, you know, uh, around here, when somebody says an American, you would assume they're, citizen or resident of the United States. And I don't mean to tell anybody who they are or what their labels are or anything like that. I'm just talking about how people generally use these terms. But in the Americas, we obviously have a strong indigenous shamanic culture. We have unbroken lines of shamanic practice in places like Ecuador, in amongst Native American tribes in the United States, that sort of thing. That being said, don't make the mistake that all tribes, all indigenous tribes, are shamanic. That's not exactly true, but it is a very widespread practice. We find shamanism everywhere in the world. We find it in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in the Americas, in Australia, in the Pacific Islands. We find shamanic practice. And, I'm using a very sort of rigid definition of shamanism. If you just think of shamanism or a shaman as any indigenous medicine person, spiritual medicine worker, or spiritual functionary, then you can apply the label of shaman to just about every culture in the world. And in fact, the word shaman in Sanskrit and Pali and Chinese just means like priest or Buddhist ascetic or Buddhist priest. Rhymes with Judas priest, but Buddhist priest. So in those languages, shaman means something different than the way we are using it in English and the way that it's used in some indigenous languages. Shamanism as a word has been around in English for a very long time. We know that it was first written in a European book in the late 1690s by a Dutch gentleman who had traveled to Siberia as part of a trip to Russia and had encountered, Tungsik people or the Tungus people in Siberia, and who spoke Tungsik and brought that word back with him. And so a lot of people think that's exactly where the word originated, and that is, where it came from, and our use of it in English borrows directly from the Tungus people of Siberia. That's one small part of the story. Like, we don't know where the word originated. It's probably in some dead Indo-European language somewhere, because it exists in Semitic languages, in Sanskrit, in Chinese, and Pali, and lots of other languages, and it means kind of similar things. It is always a spiritual functionary, a spiritual person. But when we use shamanic in in the Americas, when we describe it in English, we're usually referring to specific spiritual practices along with a constellation of beliefs. So, shamanism in America. Um, some research states that there are at least 100 Native American tribes that practice shamanism in the United States. I have no reason to doubt that. The number could be higher. I don't actually know. I mean, it's easy to look up how many recognized tribes there are. Those are the tribes that the U.S. government puts an official stamp on. Um, that's an outsider kind of saying who people are. So there are many more tribes that exist than are officially recognized by the United States. And there are a lot of them that no longer exist, or there's a lot of linguistic links that have been lost. I know here in the Northeast, between the Piscataqua and the Passamaquoddy and the different tribes that are up here in Maine. There are people who identify with tribes but speak different indigenous languages because of the way that the tribes intermarried or were forced off their land or forced. So it's a very complicated topic, and there's a lot of language lost and that sort of thing due to repression by the U.S. government. Same thing happened in a lot of places. Native Americans were forced to stop speaking their language. Their children were taken to schools and made to, cut their hair and dress in Western ways and not use their languages. And so there, unfortunately, is a tremendous amount of loss there: soul loss, information loss, spiritual loss, all kinds of stuff. Horrific history there. So that being said, in the in the 60s and 70s, there was a gentleman by the name of Carlos Castaneda. He wrote a bunch of books that became very, very popular. They were read by everybody from the Beatles to lots of thought leaders around, and he sort of documented, if you will, his trips to alternate states of reality with this spiritual teacher from Mexico and that sort of thing. It's a complicated topic, Carlos Castaneda, because he, in looking at him one way, he was a bit of a charlatan. Some, if not most or all of his stuff was definitely made up. Times that he said he was in Mexico, there are records of him being in the US. He built a little cult around himself, by all accounts abused many of his cult members, as cult leaders kind of do. And so it remains to be seen whether he actually did the things that he wrote about. That being said, I got hooked into the Carlos Castaneda thing in the early 90s. I read a lot of his books, and I did find a lot of what he was writing about to be truthful. Well, there are some spiritual truths there. So it's not like you can throw the baby out with the bathwater if you just say everything he wrote about was hogwash. But it is important to read that stuff with a critical eye, as it is, no matter what, is probably not his stuff is probably not historical documentation. It remains to be seen whether the elder that he wrote about even existed, or whether he even made the trips that he claims he did, that sort of thing. But his writings about being in non-ordinary reality and that sort of thing, a lot of that rings true. The other part of that is that we can take from that is that his books became so popular, it really pushed interest in shamanism throughout America, throughout the world, really, in a lot of ways, and popularized it. And so, for what it's worth, who knows what we would be like today without his writings. His books are very entertaining if you want to read them for that, and you can parse out some spiritual truths from there. But take everything with a grain of salt. Take everything for checking. Check on it yourself. So sort of after that time, or during that time, but then the writings came after that time. There's an anthropologist named Michael Harner, who is from the United States, who went down to the Amazon basin and wound up doing ayahuasca and maybe some other hallucinogens with native shamans there, and which opened him up to some really life-changing spiritual experiences. And he did a lot of research going around the world and looking at different shamanic cultures, and sort of pulled out the common practices among those shamanic cultures, and founded this methodology called core shamanism, which is, chances are, if you're studying shamanism not with a teacher who is non-indigenous, that's what you're learning: core shamanism, which is a set of practices that are common across culture. They are removed from indigenous cultural context, and that's important for a couple of reasons. One, we have to look out for cultural appropriation, meaning as somebody who didn't grow up amongst indigenous people, it would be problematic for me to go in, take their practices, make them my own, and teach them. So if we remove the things that are culturally significant, it opens up shamanic practice to everybody. Now, some people take an issue with that because it is removed from, it's kind of removed from a direct line of history. I do not, and obviously I practice core shamanism, but the way I look at it is this: my ancestors, hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, belonged to shamanic tribes. And yes, those tribes were, most of them were in Europe, although I have ancestry, I have some Native American ancestry and some from, Asia and Africa as well, but very small amounts. But my European ancestors, I know where they are from. I know what, essentially what tribes they probably belong to there. And those people practiced shamanism. Druids were shamanistic people, and their religion was completely wiped out by the Romans. So the Roman Catholic Church came along and wiped out shamanic practice, converted everybody at the point of a sword, or at the end of a noose, or at the stake of a bonfire, as it were, through violence, converted all of these people and made them lose their heritage. And so as a European descendant of colonists and all of these things, I want to have a great deal of respect for indigenous cultures. I don't want to steal from them. I don't want to teach what they teach. I don't want to take their practices and make them my own. But I do have a birthright to shamanic practice, and that makes core shamanism a good thing to step into for me, because these techniques work. I can use them in healing practices. I don't believe in holding back healing from anyone because of who their parents were. I find the concept of that to be quite offensive. That being said, that doesn't mean that I am going to emulate religious ceremonies that I don't have a connection to, or that haven't been given to me to emulate, or that sort of thing. I have participated in Native American ceremonies that I have been invited into, that are, were performed by people who had, who are allowed to perform those ceremonies. So I have participated in a pipe ceremony with a pipe carrier. I've participated in a sweat lodge with somebody who was not just qualified but received, was in direct lineage with a Native American tribe who performed sweat lodges. So I don't, but I don't do those things myself. I don't conduct sweat lodges because it's not part of my culture. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not going to misappropriate culture. Today, in the Americas, there is a wide variety of shamanic practice because America has more or less been open for a very long time. And we could argue about immigration. I won't get into that. But, uh, you know, besides the pandemic that sort of shut down international travel for a long period of time, there would be shamanic teachers who would come in from, into the United States anyway, from Central and South America, from Mexico, from Europe. We have people who do Celtic shamanism come in. We have Mongolian shamans who travel in, Nepalese and Tibetan shamans who travel in, and lots of these people are very interested in sharing their spiritual practices with people. And I do think that's a beautiful thing. I do think that it's okay for them to decide to share them, and if it's okay with them for somebody else to teach them, and there's conditions or that are met and that sort of thing, it's totally fine. It's not for me to tell people that that's not okay. But in the Americas today, and or the United States anyway, shamanism in America is strong. It's growing. The interest is huge. Now, shamanism always kind of awakens, the impulse to awaken as a shaman comes from crisis. It could be individual crisis, it could be tribal crisis, it could be national, international, world crisis. So with a global pandemic, we are in the midst of a pretty significant global crisis, and a lot of people are being called to shamanism as to reach out to shamanic practitioners for healing, but also to heal themselves, to learn some shamanic practice, and eventually maybe someday become a shamanic practitioner themselves. So the state of shamanism in America is very strong at the moment. The interest in it is tremendous. There is a lot of cross-cultural sharing. I have a very good friend who is a Native American elder who has traveled out west to an annual gathering of healers a couple of times, and there are people from all over the world who come in to share shamanic practice. And to me, that is an absolute beautiful thing that transcends culture, and people who share healing practices openly. There's a lot to respect and love about that. And the flip side to that is a lot of othering, is a lot of, you don't get to participate in this healing because you are perceived as other. In shamanism, we are all connected. We're all connected underneath, and we are all one. We are all part of one human culture, as it were. And so I don't believe in withholding healing from people. Specific practices, specific cultural practices, specific religiously significant things, if it's important to keep that within your culture, I completely understand that. But to say you can't be healed from something, and if I have the ability to heal you, and I hold that back because I perceive you as other than I am, less worthy than I am, then that's where the problem lies. So that's a little overview of shamanism in America. I hope that you will subscribe to my YouTube channel. You will like this video, and I've got a lot more coming, and I will talk to you real soon.